What is up, everyone? Today we're working on project ideas. So, what you're watching is me coming up with ideas and concepts for my project. And then, while I do that, I want to discuss how you can generate a lot of ideas easily. So, it's very important to learn how to come up with as many ideas as possible and be as creative as possible in your art process. Like, if you want to make art, you want the process of coming up with ideas to be easy. You want it to feel fluid, to feel intuitive, to feel like it's not super stressful, because if coming up with ideas becomes too stressful, then you're unlikely to generate or create as much art. But if you have more ideas than you can execute on, then you'll be able to always make a lot of art without feeling like you hit art block, right? So the biggest thing for coming up with ideas easily is to set a limitation. So for example, for these drawings, what you'll see is that I'll draw us a blue circle where the head will go, and I'll also draw shoulders and a neck for all of these character designs. So even though these characters aren't very human looking, they're very abstract, and that's on purpose. I know that all of these designs will have a head shape, will have a neck, and will have shoulders. And they usually also have hands. So having this limitation gives me a starting point. So I draw this blue circle and I'm like, okay, this is where the head is going to go. Now I can play around with the design of this head. But this gives me a starting point and a limitation that makes it very easy for me to be creative within a specific box, right? You want to create a sandbox within which you can create things. You don't want to feel like you always have limitless options. You want to feel like I have a lot of options, but they're still limited within this space. It makes it much easier to do, right? It's the same thing as if I told you to draw anything. That's kind of difficult, right? There's too many options. You have the paradox of choice. It's just like too challenging. You're not going to be happy with what you end up with because there's just too many options. But if I say, hey, I want you to draw a tree, then you have a starting point, and then you can be as creative within that space. So, okay, well, I didn't tell you what type of tree, I didn't tell you what the landscape would look like. So you can have the space within which you can explore. So even though there is a limitation, you can still be extremely creative within that limitation. So a good way to create a limitation for yourself is to start a project where you do 6 to 12 pieces within a certain space, right? So for example, you can say, okay, I'm going to do 6 to 12 portrait drawings that represent taking inspiration from the zodiac or anything like that. You can just come up with certain limitations. You could just do 12 portraits if that's something you want to do, or you can add other limitations like, oh, I want to use certain elements. Like, let's say you want to use, like I did a project where I drew portraits that I included foliage and plants on the faces. So that gives me a certain starting point. Like, okay, I know I'm going to draw a face. I know I'm going to draw plants. Now, how can I do this in a creative way? And like starting a project that has 6 to 12 pieces makes it very easy for you to wake up every day or to, whenever you do draw. It gives you a starting point that makes it easy to jump into it. Because if you're always starting from a blank page where you have no limitations and no brief, it's very, very hard to come up with things that you want to draw. But if you have a project in mind where you're like, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do 12 pieces, and then I'm done with this project, then you can come up with a new idea, or you can just expand on that same project over and over again, right? Like you can set different limitations or change things in a subtle way, right? Like you can do male portraits and female portraits, or portraits with long hair and short hair, or whatever. You can play around with these elements and set limitations for yourself. We'll pull inspiration from different places, right? You can do things based on seasons. You can do things based on tea. Like that's a very popular thing to do, is like 12 wizards based on tea. That's a way to do it, where you pick a tea flavor and then you try to draw something that is inspired by it. And that's kind of like a good way to create a project for yourself. And you want to make sure that you pay attention to what you actually like. So you want to pick a project that you actually enjoy doing, right? Like if you don't like drawing portraits, don't pick a portrait project, right? Pick a project that suits your style or whatever you're inspired by in the moment. But you want to make sure that you push yourself to do between 6 to 12 pieces, because that way you explore that idea as much as possible. And it's a good way to get people excited about what you do. Because if people feel like you're just all over the place, where you're just doing random pieces of artwork, it's very hard for people to find the thing that they like in your work. But if you have a certain limitation within your project, then people feel like, oh, I'm part of the series. I get to enjoy this feast of art. It's almost like you want your art to feel like it belongs together in a way that dinner would feel like it belongs together. You know, all the ingredients fit together the same way you want your art pieces to fit together within this one project, right? So it doesn't mean that you have to stick to that one project forever, but at least do one project where there's 6 to 12 pieces where they all belong. And like I mentioned before, to make sure that you actually feel creative, you want to draw ideas regularly, right? So you want to come up with as many ideas as you can on a regular basis so that you have more ideas in the bank, like more ideas in your sketchbook than you have the ability to finish, right? So let's say, for example, these paintings, I can only do like 1 or 2 paintings per week for this project, but I generate as many ideas as possible. So I have tons and tons of these ideas, these sketches in my sketchbook that I can always pull from that way. I always have this backlog. So let's say, for example, if in a couple of weeks I just don't feel creative, I still have all these ideas that I've done when I did feel better in the back that I can just pull from. I can just pull from the past self and make sure that I always have more to work on. Because you're not always going to feel equally creative every day. So what you want to do is you want your average output to be pretty high. You want to make sure that every week you spend some time coming up with ideas. And that also makes it easier to pick the ideas that are great, right? So if you only generate 2 ideas, but you execute on those 2 ideas, one of those 2 ideas might not be very good. But if you have 10 ideas to pick from, picking the 2 best ones is very, very easy to do. So you want to make sure that you come up with as many ideas as possible. Another thing that you want to keep in mind when you're trying to come up with art ideas is to expect failure. So you can't expect yourself to come up with good ideas every single time. You want to make sure that you take the time to come up with a lot of ideas and also expect that not all of them are going to be good. Your ideas are going to fluctuate like very drastically, especially in the beginning, because you're still developing your skills, you're still developing your taste. So you're going to have to explore a lot to figure out what works for you. So the fluctuation between ideas that feel really great and ideas that feel completely trash the fluctuation is going to be huge. And that's something that you just have to expect, and you just have to accept it when it happens. When you draw an idea that just doesn't work, you just say, hey, that's just part of the process, and then go on to the next drawing. And I think this is something that's very difficult to understand, especially early on, because when you go online, these algorithms that, you know, when you follow artists, they only put out the best work, right? So let's say if you go on Pinterest and see a bunch of drawings, you're only going to see the best drawings, and you're going to assume that everyone else comes up with great ideas, that everyone else, you know, hits 10 out of 10, every idea is great, right? But that's not the truth. What actually happens is that you only see the cream of the crop. You know, for every great idea that you see, there's going to be 50 or 100 bad ideas that you don't see. And that's something that you definitely have to keep in mind as you get used to drawing more. So be forgiving when you're drawing in your sketchbook, and make sure that you stay calm. You know, I know the temptation is going to be extremely frustrated and get emotional about it, you know, especially if you put a lot of weight on being an artist. Like if you're someone that thinks of yourself as creative, whenever you hit creative roadblocks, or whenever your work isn't up to par with what you want, you know, it's easy to feel emotional about it. But you have to make sure that, you know, you got to keep realistic expectations. Failure is part of the process. You just, you know, come up with bad ideas and come up with the good ideas once in a while. You know, the bad ideas are going to outweigh the good ideas, especially for the first few years probably. But that's just part of it. That's just part of being creative. So make sure not to be too hard on yourself. And I think that's probably the most important thing. So those are the things that I would say when it comes to coming up with ideas. You know, set a limitation, come up with a project, and draw regularly. Expect failure. And those are the things I would keep in mind when you're coming up with art ideas. So the ideas that you see me drawing here, this is all part of my spirits project. So I have my limitations. And then when I have these drawings, what I do is I pull them in, I scan all my ideas, and I'll click through the ideas once in a while and see which ones stand out to me. So I leave some room between coming up with the idea and then actually doing the painting, so that I can have a more objective view of what the drawing actually looks like. And then I'll do a digital sketch to like refine the idea and just come up with more, see if maybe the hand should be a little bit different, or like make small adjustments, because now I have a foundation that's a drawing, and then I pull into digital, do more refined to make sure that I add a step in the process where I refine my idea, and then I jump into the painting. So leaving a little bit of room is always useful, because you'll be able to be more objective if you have time in between when you came up with the idea and when you actually do the finished piece. And I think that's helped me a lot, and I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. So thank you guys so much for checking this out. If you want more of these types of videos, feel free to let me know. I know I did a few like silent videos, painting videos, but I think I'm going to do a little bit more voiceover stuff. Like I want to do voiceover stuff. It's just that recording audio is kind of challenging for me right now. I'm still trying to figure out the best way to get good audio. So that's kind of why it's kind of moved away from doing audio, like voiceover stuff. But I think I'm going to start doing it again for my painting videos because I do want to talk about the art process and my thoughts behind it. But yeah, thank you guys so much for checking this out. Make sure to check out the website and join the mailing list over on the website because it's the best way for us to stay in touch. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye. Bye-bye.